I feel loneliness in my chest.
Just a heavy weight.
Weight on your
My
back.
career has isolated
I
me.
don't have a partner. I don't have
Right
kids.
after I got married, people just fell away.
As a single
And
parent,
then
there
I
are these
retired.
My greatest fear is dying alone.
It's a doozy loneliness. It's a bad one.
How did you feel when you heard the feelings of others around from all cultures, young and old? How did you feel when you heard what they had to say about loneliness? What I can tell you is that loneliness is often very much perceived as a deeply personal struggle. That's what we think about when we think about loneliness. But basically, loneliness is a feeling that resides with, the individual, yet it can reach far, far beyond that, beyond really our personal boundaries.
For the last many weeks, I've gotten a lot of contacts, comments on the channel, emails, different things about young men, especially. I mean, it's pandemic around the world, I think, but young men, especially in this country, who are just feeling isolated and alone. It's a really bad situation in this country. Mama sent me a video link of a guy, and he was talking about in this country, the numbers of when it comes to suicides, when it comes to homelessness, when it comes to prisons, the numbers of men in these situations are astronomically higher than women.
Loneliness, I can tell you, is not merely being alone. Many people enjoy solitude. I enjoy solitude, and I find it very rejuvenating. However, I do want to say that loneliness is a subjective experience.
By people, but yet you're still feeling like you're not even around anybody.
I'm at this wedding and, kind of like on reflex, I open up my phone, I pull up the dating app and I start swiping. And then I look around and there's just like so many people around me laughing and having a good time, just being loving with each other. Yeah, it was a moment of like feeling deep loneliness.
You might try to do everything possible to find a life partner, but you might be single forever.
People cannot imagine that you'd be so lonely, that you would dread Thanksgiving and thinking like, gosh, I hope somebody invites me.
When you feel it, it can exist even in crowded rooms, as these videos that I've shown are, or as these videos you've heard are telling us about other people. Loneliness can exist when you're in a crowded room, when you're at a party, when you're in your kitchen, and you may be sharing a moment, doing shared moments with people. What I do know is that, today's research data is proving that loneliness is becoming an epidemic. It's not just the feeling of being alone, but it is a feeling of being, disconnected that, can weigh very heavy on your heart and your mind if you are feeling lonely.
Loneliness and isolation that I feel stemmed from losing my dad to suicide at 12 years old.
I feel like I've always felt lonely. What did I do to run everybody else away? I feel like something that makes people scatter.
I feel like if I don't try to be successful, I'll always regret not having tried. My loneliness ends up kind of being my punishment.
Does everybody feel like this? There must be something wrong with me.
Admitting to loneliness feels taboo. It feels like a flaw, even though it is now beginning to be a universal human experience. But I want to say this, And here's the truth. Loneliness is real. And recognizing its presence is the first step to overcoming it. So let me share a conversation with you that I had with my mom a while back. She called me after she went to a church conference. And this call wasn't unusual because I talk to my mom on a regular basis. But as she began to tell me about the church conference and this conversation started, she began telling me about, the wonderful time that she had at the conference. But as she continued to talk, she mentioned that she had heard the saddest thing at this conference. And I was like, wow, at a church conference, something sad. That's what I was thinking, in my mind. And so I was like, okay. And then also I was thinking, like, what could be sad at a church conference? Because most times when you go to a church conference, you come back rejuvenated, spiritual, uplifted, very positive. But I continued to listen to my mom as I had these thoughts, in my mind. And she started to tell me that when they were in the main hall of the church and it was time to request prayer, a lady, stood up and she was handed the microphone to share, her requested prayer. My mom stated that the lady's requested prayer was for the church or for people to pray for her signs of loneliness. This lady, as my mama continued to tell the story, stated that no matter whether she was in a crowd, whether or not she was doing something with others, she just couldn't shake the feeling of being alone. I was like, oh my gosh, wow. I cannot believe this. Somebody is saying that they're in a crowd and they're around others and talking to them, but they still felt alone. And then my mom, as she continued to tell me this story about this lady, she stated that after this lady stood up and said that she wanted a prayer to help her with loneliness, getting over loneliness, another lady stood up and said, she needed some prayer about being, lonely. I was truly like in awe when my mom was telling me this, because I was like, oh my gosh, how could this be happening? And it was, truly sad to hear what she was telling me and puzzled. And of course, they were at a church function. So of course they prayed for these ladies to try to help them. But I really was puzzled. And that is why you are, viewing me on this podcast today or listening to me on my audio podcast episode, because I truly can say that this topic, it really needs attention. So check out this YouTube video clip that I have here.
I just don't want to hear about how lonely I am.
It's just too much burden to put on.
You don't want to add to their burden
on other people. I've been trying to go to lunch with a colleague of mine on my campus for 8 years, and it still hasn't happened.
I thought I was building a family that was going to be close and connected and doing things together, and that hasn't happened.
I was important, right? I mattered to people. I thought I did. And then I retired, and the isolation was deafening.
I was diagnosed with a very rare bone marrow cancer. I have had certain friends and family disappear from my life. such a deep disappointment over those who abandon you.
Look at the time and you go, it's 3 o'clock, and you have so much of your day, and the phone doesn't ring, no one's connecting with you, and you wonder how you can make the day go by. For retirement, they used to tell you it's the golden years. Well, how can it be golden if there's no one in it?
I start to feel as if this is my punishment for not having children. And I think, well, you see, Ellen, in a sense, I find myself saying, you asked for it.
And she said, Bob, we've been married for 66 years, and we have so much to say to each other. Do you suppose other people married this long have so much to talk about? And the next night, she was gone.
When I first thought about defining loneliness, I thought, just like many others, is that loneliness was being by yourself or not being around other people. But based on, the videos you've seen, based on the conversation my mom was having with me about these church ladies, loneliness isn't solitude. Many people, they cherish alone time as a way, to recharge. And true loneliness, based on what I researched, is from a lack of meaningful connections, the absence of feeling seen or understood or being valued. Now I get it. Now I get why those ladies were feeling the way that they were feeling. Loneliness can strike you in a crowded room at a family gathering or during a quiet moment at home. So again, let me tell you, true loneliness, it stems from the lack of meaningful connections. You can connect with someone, but if it's not meaningful, you feel lonely within that connection. Or the absence of feeling seen. You may be in a crowd and everyone's talking, but you may feel like they're not really even listening to you, or they don't see you as you voice your opinion about something. Your loneliness is the lack of being understood or being valued for what you have to offer. Now I can see why, people are feeling the way that they're feeling. And the research is showing that loneliness is not just an emotional experience, it's a health issue. And can I truly say this to be true? Well, look at it, think about the videos I've shown. People are really feeling this. Loneliness is real. Studies link chronic loneliness as a risk of getting, heart disease, depression. Even loneliness can shorten, your lifespan. Research says that loneliness is as detrimental as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now let that sink in. Loneliness, based on data and research, that it is as detrimental as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, one may say, how are people so lonely when we have social media and gatherings and activities to do outside the home? And the list can go on of things that you can do. Well, despite, us having this social media and genuine connections, these types of things are shallow. Scrolling through picture perfect lives online, we definitely know that that's shallow, and it amplifies, your feeling of inadequacy or isolation, because you're trying to figure out how these people doing what they're doing and why I can't do these things and so on. really, these people that are online sharing all of their business, as I've said before on some other on another podcast episode, is that most times when they're sharing, those things, they are definitely not living that life like that. As my kids, when I was teaching, would say, they not about that life. Okay. So I can see how people can get into that and kind of feel like they are lonely because they're not being able to do that. Even in the modern work culture, and people who are living, by themselves, they often prioritize individualism over community. So, that's why people are feeling like they're lonely. Think about the people, who you are working with in the office, and who you are connecting with or who you're not connecting with, because they may be over in their cubicle or in their classroom or in their office space, and they're working all alone or working at home. No connection, nothing, being connected. They don't communicate with anyone other than a Zoom meeting here or there, but that's not a real connection. So I can see how loneliness is becoming an epidemic, and especially after, during the pandemic and after. When it was in full effect of the pandemic, we had to stay in and we had to really be alone, especially if you lived alone. People who had families, maybe they weren't feeling as lonely, but again, you can be in a crowded space and still feel lonely because you're not feeling valued, or that connection is not even there. So, social distancing and all of those things that were necessary during that time, it deepened isolation and it made it even worse. So in a world full of activity and technology, the quiet, pervasive presence of loneliness has become a societal concern. Loneliness is real. It is truly real. It's more than an emotional experience, okay? Loneliness is a complex and stigmatized reality that continues, to impact individuals and communities alike. I just keep going back to that conversation that my mom had with me after going to this church event, and someone asking for prayer to help them to get over loneliness. Is sad, but it's real. And in order to help yourself and get out of that stupor of loneliness, we got to do something, because loneliness is not just a personal issue. It's a societal one. And the rise of loneliness, all it is revealing to us how deeply interconnected our well-being is with the quality of our relationships. And they're really not that connected. People are not as connected as it used to be, like people say back in the day. But what we have to do is acknowledge loneliness and its impact. And we can begin doing that by creating a culture that values connections and compassion and community. Let me say that again. We can begin and having an impact on people who are lonely by creating a culture of that values connections, that have compassion, and have a sense of community. It starts with small intentional acts, like a smile at a stranger. I do that a lot. I am a big vibe person, big energy. I smile at people, even though they may not smile back, but it makes me feel good inside. Sometimes a stranger may need that smile, a phone call to a friend, joining a group. These are things that you can do if you are at that lonely stage, or you know somebody that may be feeling lonely. And just because they're in the house and being alone is not loneliness. That's not. They can be in a crowd. Remember, we just went through all of that earlier as I was talking about it. So really be able to recognize when someone says that they are lonely. So how do you recognize this? You look for signs. You look for signs like having an emotional disconnect. You feel misunderstood. So that person or you could be feeling, misunderstood as you go through something. You may be feeling that no one truly understands, your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. Sometimes you have an emotional numbness where social interactions, they feel hollow and not genuine. I've had those before. That's not saying that I was feeling lonely, but sometimes you do. But a person who's really feeling lonely, these are some things that they're feeling. They're having that emotional disconnect. Having an emotional disconnect can have you also having a lack of fulfillment, where conversations and relationships seem to be superficial, leaving you very, very unsatisfied. That's one sign. Another sign is when you feel sad or empty most days, feeling isolated in crowds. You struggle to engage with others. You feel invisible. A sense that your presence basically doesn't matter to the people that's around you. That's when you know that you're feeling lonely. Some people, they don't think about this, but when you overcompensate or try too hard to please, you're having a sign of loneliness. That is a sign. Another sign of loneliness is self-doubt or a negative self-talk. Sometimes when people are talking to you, they may be saying something negative to you, but it's kind of about themselves. And they may have self-doubt. They don't want to do certain things. Physical symptoms or physical signs that you may see, if a person is experiencing loneliness, could be fatigue, sleep disturbance, physical aches like a headache. That can be because you have having an emotional toll of loneliness. You can start to have avoidance patterns, like avoiding meaningful conversations or opportunities to open up, fearing vulnerability or rejection. Those are signs of loneliness. And the biggest one that I think is a sign of loneliness is the overuse of digital connections. Enough said. Enough said, because we have an overuse of digital connection, relying heavy on social media or texting to feel connected makes you feel even emptier after you've done it. That is a sign of loneliness. If that's where you're getting your connection from someone who's telling their business on there that's really not going through whatever they're going through on there, or they're living this big life and you think that's the way to live, that's a sign of loneliness. If you think that is how you make a connection. If you see these signs in yourself or others, it's important to seek or offer support. Seek or offer support. seek support, meaning talking to people, even talking to a counselor or talking to a friend, telling them how you feel. And maybe they watch this video or listen to this audio podcast and said, hey, these are some things you're going through. I listened to Dr. Joy and she was telling us some signs or some things that was going on to let us know what the signs of loneliness is, because loneliness, again, is real.
As a single parent, I feel like it's the most important and biggest thing I will ever do in life. And I just keep it to myself because there's no one to share it with.
I decided deliberately not to have children while all my close friends decided the opposite. And as they were focusing more and more of their time on family life, I became deprioritized.
I would have never told you that I would work this many hours as I do, and I wouldn't have a group of friends surrounding me.
When my spouse comes home and she just kind of goes off into her corner, and she's the first person I want to talk to, and I'm the last person she wants to talk to.
I've been a single mom for almost 14 years. And I just sometimes feel like I want someone to reach out to me and take care of me.
So I want to give my support by giving some other, some tips that will help you feel more connected. I gave you the signs to look for if you or someone else is feeling lonely. Let's talk about, the tips. Even if you say, I really don't need this. Just remember, you may not need it, but someone that you are around, they may need these tips. But before I give these tips, I want you to listen to this TED Talk video clip. I think it will sum up why tips are important. And let's take a listen.
Loneliness is an emotional state that we have when we're feeling disconnected. But our need for connection is ingrained in our DNA. Loneliness is a signal, just like fight or flight, that something isn't right. Loneliness is a public health crisis. But 1 in 5 Americans suffer from loneliness. Which means if you haven't personally suffered from loneliness, it's almost guaranteed that somebody you know closely has. It can cause depression, and it can even lead to premature death. But now more than ever, we're living alone. We're spending more time online and less time making meaningful in-person connections. So when emotional storms hit, things like losing a job, or going through a divorce or a death, instead of leaning in towards our communities, we've learned to suffer alone.
Okay, so instead of suffering alone, try or tell someone about these tips. So I will say, in order to address loneliness or have someone else address loneliness, start with individual actions, because addressing loneliness requires effort and courage. But the payoff, I can tell you, it's going to be worth it. And the first tip is acknowledge that you're feeling lonely. It is okay to feel lonely. Admitting it doesn't mean that you're weak. It just means that you're human. And in order, once you admit it, or once that person that you may be giving this information to acknowledge that they're lonely, then they can start to do these things. Prioritize their relationships by dedicating time to nurturing meaningful connections. Just being in a crowd with some people laughing and talking and not making a connection, no wonder you feel lonely, because you're not making the connection. Another tip is to practice vulnerability and be open about your feelings to foster deeper bonds. It's okay sometimes to be vulnerable. I'm vulnerable myself to you. I practice vulnerability all the time. I tell you feelings of how I am actually feeling. Another tip is to engage in community activities, join clubs, volunteer, and participate in group events. And when you do, you're going to seek real connections. Because when you seek real connections, you focus on the quality over the quantity. The quality over the quantity. You know how they say that you can have 400 friends on Facebook, but they're not all your friends? True. That's the quantity, 400. You're not seeking that. You're seeking real connections, the quality of the relationships. Of those 400 friends that may be liking your things on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, millions of followers, I guarantee you, if you look at the quality of what that person is saying and people are commenting in the comments and really involved, those are the connections you want, not the quantity. It can be millions of people like your stuff and have no type of connection with you, okay? You want to call on a friend. You want to join a community group. You want to attend events that align with your interests. When you seek these real connections, you will start to prevent loneliness. And then you should practice self-compassion. Loneliness only, comes with self-criticism. Treat yourself with kindness and patience as you navigate these feelings. When you do that, then that will help you to get over loneliness. And then I have 2 more tips for you. You need to limit passive social media use. Instead of going up and down, 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 scrolling, engage in meaningful online social media. If you're listening to this podcast on video and you want to engage in the comments. That's showing meaningful connection, not something that's just passive going on. Okay? Because then you develop a community. That's what the Joy Chaser Nation is all about. Developing a community of passionate people whose purpose is to chase joy. That's my purpose. That's why I am here talking, because I want that to be your purpose, to chase joy. You want authentic conversations when you are talking to others. And then something that I feel passionate about is giving to others, volunteering your time, volunteering your worth when you're talking. Volunteering is powerful, and it's a powerful antidote to loneliness. Helping others fosters connections and gives you a sense of purpose. So these are what I've named today. These are just some individual actions you can start and that you can really, hone in on daily. And the last thing that I want to say to you is that loneliness is a reminder of our need for connection. That is why they say that loneliness is real. That is why they are saying that loneliness is an epidemic. It's not a flaw to be lonely, but it's a signal to you or to someone you love or to someone. It is a signal that something is missing in your life. So make connections a priority, because in the end, we all need each other. And we all want to have those true connections and that true community in order to keep chasing joy. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I gave you some good pointers today. And I hope you would take this for yourself if you need it, or take this for someone else and give them what you've learned through this podcast today. See you next time.
Until next time, my friend. See you in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my podcast.